Saxon Wars, were they wars of religion or were they wars of territorial gain? Today we're going to talk about the Saxon Wars waged by Charlemagne and see if they are, as I just said, wars primarily for religious conversion to Christianity, or if they're going to be wars, they were wars of territorial gain. Just based off of regional powers duking it out. So, to begin with, the wars started during Charlemagne's grandfather's time. So Charlemagne was the son of Pepin the Short, or Pepin the Third, and his father was Charles Martel, who is the first Charles in the Carolingian dynasty, also called the Pepinids or the Anglophons. I can never say that word. By the time you get to Charlemagne in the 770s, the war had progressed. So Charles Martel in the 720s starts engaging with the Saxons. The Saxons were in the northeast of the area. You had Francia, which is partly France, partly Germany. And then you have Saxony, which would eventually become part of Francia and then parts of Germany and whatnot. So during this time, there was Francia proper, which was usually Bavaria, Neustria, and Austria. And the Saxons would come down and the Franks would come up, and it was back and forth for a while. But it was very regional and it wasn't very widespread. These were rare encounters, but enough to cause some wars. He would eventually have a strike that ceased the wars for a while. It was something that caused peace. Hostages were given from the Saxons to the Franks and peace was had. Things would progress under Pepin the Third or Pepin the Short, and especially when he became king of Francia, he would be the one to remove the Merovingian kings who had been there since Clovis's time, and they had lasted 250-ish years. And then the Carolingians would take over under Pepin the Short. So he would start engaging in wars again with the Saxons, and this would last for a while, and this would continue into Charlemagne's lifetime. And under Charlemagne, it would last about 32 years, give or take. There's some debate about when exactly the wars ended, what you could consider a ending of a war, because the Saxons would revolt all the way up into Louis the Pious's time, which is Charlemagne's son who took over the throne. But the war kind of ended in the 780s, 790s, and all the way up to 804. There was very small skirmishes by that point, but the main bulk of Saxony was now under the Carolingian rule. So I'll make sure my mic isn't dying. So yeah, it lasted about 32 years is what many scholars kind of say. So the war started with Charlemagne after his brother Carloman, he dies of disease, and Charlemagne takes full control over Francia. Now we're not sure if that was coincidence, if they were planning on going to war and it just hadn't happened yet, if it was just that's when the Saxons invaded, or Charlemagne was ready to do some imperialistic expansion. He was very much about securing and expanding the Frankish borders. So anyway, this started in 772, and he would continue, or he would go into Saxony that year, and he would do two things that would really intensify these wars. So the first thing was he would take the castle called Eresburg, and it would become a main hub for Charlemagne and his men, and he would destroy a thing called the Irminsul. This was some type of tree or like totem pole type thing. We're not exactly sure. We don't have any archaeological findings for it. There's no good descriptions of it back during the actual period. All we have are small descriptions and pictures drawn centuries later. So we're not really sure exactly what it was. But it was very important religiously for the Saxons. It was a very big thing for them. So he destroys it. Being a Christian, he does not want something that's pagan. He destroys it. It was a big thing to cement his power and authority. That's a big thing we will see throughout this entire war, was that, of course, religion played a part. Religion plays a part in all aspects of human life, even today. Even those people that consider themselves, minorly religious, like there's some form of religious belief that we function with. The same was back then. So Christianity was completely intertwined with Charlemagne's politics. So naturally, he was going to do religious aspects in his wars, like destroy the Irminsul. So he thought that that was a strong enough action to deter the Saxons from invading again. Einhard, who is his biographer, he wrote that we don't know who started the first invasion from Saxony into Francia or vice versa. All we do know is that Saxons would come into Francia and kill Franks, and Franks would go into Saxony and kill Saxons. It was a back and forth thing, and Charlemagne, as far as we can tell, as far as I can tell, he just had enough. He's like, we're done. Saxony is a thorn in our side. We're at a point where we can do something about it, and we're going to do something. So he thought he'd done such a good job at deterring the Saxons that he, in the winter, goes into territory of the Lombards, Lombardia, and he goes to war with them. They were bothering the Pope. The Pope had asked for help over many years. He had asked Charles Martel, who said no. He had asked Pippin the Short. He said yes, and he would become a patrician of Rome, meaning he was a quasi-protector, ruler kind of person. And then again, the Pope would ask Charlemagne. These were many different popes. You had Stephen, Hadrian, and Leo were the three big popes that would play within the Frankish Roman political world. So he had asked him, I think it was Hadrian this time, had asked Charlemagne, hey, can you come help? The Lombards are attacking again. They're bothering us. They want our territory. And so Charlemagne decided that this was a time to act. So he goes in, he and I think it was his uncle, they divide their forces. Charlemagne's favorite tactic was the pincer. So he would divide and crush to the side. It was very effective at that time, especially he was slowly changing Frankish warfare from, not him specifically, but the Franks were slowly moving from foot soldiers to cavalry. This would eventually turn into the French knights that we know so well in the later medieval period. It started during the Frankish time, and it would really increase during Charlemagne's time. We have writings and descriptions of how successful and how powerful the Frankish cavalry was. They could be moving straight forward, and that with whatever signal they would have, they could move sideways incredibly quickly and completely uniformly. And it was devastating to most people. Now, they didn't really fight any of the large empires at the time. The Franks never went to war with the Byzantium, or not in a straight head-on-head way. They never went to war with the Abbasids over near Baghdad. They went a little to war with the Umayyads in Spain, but it was such a mess that it was very difficult getting the entire Frankish army over the Pyrenees into Spain. The one time he did try it, he was supposed to get help, and they never showed up. So Charlemagne never did it again because it was kind of a failure. And he had other things he wanted to deal with. So he goes to Pavia, which is the capital of the Lombards. He besieges it, conquers it, and becomes king of the Lombards, to put that whole story into a short episode. And then, excuse me, and then the Saxons invade again. So this is between 773 and 774. They attack, and they attack a place called Buraburg. And so he has to re-invade Saxony. He really gets conquers them, because there's three different sections of Saxony. There's Westphalia or Westphalia, Eastphalia, and Anglia or something like that. I'm blanking on the third one. And basically it's west, middle, east. So he goes and he attacks different places. And so in 774, he captures a city called, or a castle called Syberg. And this would also become a big place, but Eresburg would become one of the big ones. And then Paderborn he would create, and that would become his central capital in Saxony. Because the Franks at the time would move around. They didn't have one specific capital. So Paris wasn't the big capital of Francia yet. So he would go between Aachen was a big one, Paderborn, and some other places. But he would move around his territory quite often. So he takes Syberg, he restores Eresburg because the Saxons had destroyed it. They had gone in through a little bit of treachery and destroyed it. And so he had to rebuild the walls and get it up going. But while he's doing that, and after he gets some hostages in one section of Saxony, other Saxons attacked a place called Lübeck, and they killed a bunch of the soldiers. They got in while the soldiers were mostly sleeping. They were able to get around or kill the guards and kill a lot of the soldiers while they were sleeping. So things kind of calmed down a little bit. There's skirmishes back and forth again until 776, when the Saxons go and they take Castle Eresburg again, and they destroy the walls again. This would become a back and forth thing, though I think this would be one of the last times they would take the castle. And at this point is when conversion becomes a requirement. So up until this point, outside of destroying the Irminsul, there was never really any continuing of religious pressure. Of course, there were missionaries that were sent in. This has always been a big thing with Christianity. They would always send in missionaries. We've seen this throughout the entire Christian world. And many a time it wasn't for changing the culture of the people, just the religion and moral practices. This is when we would start seeing some Christianization happening to change culture. So when you have pagan Saxons and Christian Franks, they're not really going to mesh well because of those religious differences. You don't have the concept of the modern world where we can agree to disagree as long as certain things don't interfere. Even today, though, we do have religious conflict because certain religions just don't mesh well. So at this point in 776, so 4 years into the war, we now see Charlemagne pushing conversion and baptism to those who surrender. So if you surrender, you have to swear fealty to Charlemagne. You have to be baptized. These are two big things. And it's because Charlemagne is starting to become more and more frustrated with the Saxons. Now, so he believed that by forcing them to change religiously and change their fealty, things might get better and the war might end. He did not expect this to become a year upon year war. This is basically where Charlemagne would have to either send soldiers or himself into Saxony all the time. Things would go up and down depending on the years. We have around this time a man named Widukind. He would be kind of the rebellion warlord that would lead Saxons back and forth. He would cause problems for Charlemagne. He would lead some battles, and then if things turned south for him, he would head north, actually, to the Danes, and they would hide him for a while, and then he would go back and forth for a little bit. Things would climax in 782. This is when the most controversial moment in Charlemagne's life. Many historians argue back and forth. But this is when he beheaded 4,500 Saxons. So one, we're not sure if that number is accurate. We don't know. It could be more. Usually people go less. That's just a lot of people to behead, especially in one day. But these were not just normal Saxons. These were rebels. So a lot of people are like, oh, he just massacred a bunch of Saxons. Like, no, they were soldiers. They were people that continually rebelled. Not that I am excusing that type of behavior, but this did happen 1,200 years ago. So he beheads 4,500 Saxons. He also starts putting in laws that force conversion. You cannot do anything pagan. You have to be Christian. You have to go to church or mass. You have to do all these things. Or you could also be beheaded. He makes incredibly strong laws because he was getting so tired of the Saxons rebelling. As the king, he thought it was his duty to do something about it. And so, as we can see throughout the years, he intensifies his actions. He gets stronger and stronger and stronger until he gets to this point where forced conversion, mass execution, and these types of strong acts. And it would work. By 785, Widukind surrenders. He gets baptized. He swears fealty, trying to find the words, to Charlemagne. And things would kind of calm down. There's some revolts in the 90s. Again, things wouldn't fully end for Charlemagne until 804. And then we would see a while later, Saxons would rise up against his son, Louis the Pious. But for the most part, for Charlemagne, things would end around 85 and then little ripples and then 804. So to answer the question, was this a religious or territorial war? Based off of my research, reading other people's writings of secondary sources and reading the primary sources, primarily the Frankish annals, which are a year-to-year kind of statement of what happened that year. And they would have some amendments. They would change things, or not really change things, but add things years later. And also by reading Einhard's biography, he talks about it a little bit. And based off all of that, this was not a religious war. This was a territorial war with religious elements. Now that's important because the primary reason for a war is what you can blame the war on. This was based off of territory. The Franks were expansionists at this time. They were ready to expand. They were needing to expand. This is why he went to war with the Saxons, the Avars, the Lombards. He would even go to war a little bit with the Greeks and the Spanish Moors. He was constantly engaging in war with somebody because Francia was ready to grow and he had to do something. So it was an expansionist territorial war with religious elements. Because again, religion is baked into everything. You cannot do something without your religious, spiritual aspect coming out. As a Christian, you were going to do things through a Christian lens. If you're a pagan, if you're Muslim, whatever it might be, this is how just the world works. So of course, religion came with his territorial war. That doesn't mean he was using Christianity correctly, doesn't mean he was using it incorrectly. That's a whole other different argument. But some people argue that this was a religious war and it was based off of his faith why he was attacking the pagan Saxons. When in reality, he was attacking the Saxons who happened to be pagan. So that is the culmination of the Saxon Wars by Charlemagne. If you enjoy this type of conversations, if you enjoy listening to history and the making of history and why historians talk about what they talk about, and anything especially with the early medieval period, the Franks, and all that implies, then this is the podcast for you. I would appreciate if you liked, commented about any questions you have, shared all the things. Thank you, and have a wonderful day.